everybody. Another day, another set of acronyms that we need to follow, and new frameworks and government programs we need to adjust to. And no better than these two guys on with me today to talk about the changes with FedRAMP, coming from the U.S. government, of course. Jason Ford, Michael Parisi from Steel Patriot Partners. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. So this is, I follow this stuff because I'm a nerd, but FedRAMP has been changing, specifically the Consolidated Rules. And Jason, you put a blog together that outlines what's going on really, really well. So I'm going to encourage folks to read that. Reading is one thing. Hearing it straight from the horse's mouth, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, how it impacts your customers, how you're helping them move through that change, and presumably the challenges that come with it is a different thing. And so I want to talk to both of you about what you're seeing and hearing. Before we get into the topic itself, maybe a quick word from each of you, your role at Steel Patriot Partners, and your vision for why this is an important piece.
Yeah, so I can go first. I'm Chief Growth Officer here, Steel Patriot Partners, responsible for everything on the sales side, strategic and channel partner programs as well. Why is this important? I go back to I think one of the famous Godfather lines of, just as I thought I was out, they pull me back in, right? We've seen this before, not just relative to FedRAMP specifically, but across a number of other frameworks and standards and expectations. And I think it will continue to happen, right, from an overall industry perspective. But why it's important now is because I think this is for two reasons. One, this is such a quote unquote significant change, no pun intended, because that is actually a FedRAMP term. And I think we'll get into that from a terminology perspective. So not only is it a significant change, but also it's here. And I think over the last several months and years, you've had a lot of fence sitters, right? And they've been hearing about all these changes and all these proposed pilots, and many of those have now been adopted. So the reality is here, and it's time to stop questioning whether it's going to become reality, because now it is. And now, how do we deal with it? Very similar to, I think, what we saw around CMMC for a number of years. And I mean, that was something that initially was going to happen within 2 years, that went to 4, went to 5, went to 6. But guess what? Now it's here. And in a similar vein, changes to the overall FedRAMP program is something that now needs to be addressed from a business perspective. And I think we'll get into that, right? What are some of the business elements that need to occur? But Jason, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so Jason Ford, CEO, co-founder, Steel Patriot Partners. Background, been doing federal compliance since the late 90s with FISMA and SAS 70 back in the day, for you old folks in the room that are watching this. And now SOC 2 and many iterations, obviously. I was early on to go through the FedRAMP program back in 2013. So second platform as a service to get authorized back in those days. So been dealing with FedRAMP since Rev 3, right? And all the trials and tribulations as a cloud service provider of trying to realize that, hey, you're the second platform as a service. And really the rules aren't really defined early on, and helping define some of those things. That time, Matt Goodrich was obviously the PMO director, working heavily with them, understanding that as a cloud service provider, also working with the agency directly, and having that experience to kind of be the go-between or the mediator to try to deliver this new technology back then was crazy, right? So FedRAMP and the program itself, living through that for the last, let's call it 12 years for me, has been, interesting because, while early adoption of Rev 3 was really difficult because there wasn't a whole lot of example, we had the same thing happen when we went to Rev 4 with continuous monitoring, right? And those changes that went in with significant changes, and we had all the things that went associated with that. This is no different than all of those things, right? We've seen this before as an industry. We've seen how this plays out as a pilot, and then how it pushes out over time. This one's moving faster than the pilot was for continuous monitoring. But at the end of the day, it's still the same process. It's still the same thing. It still needs to be written in to how these things get delivered. And then 3PAOs have to be told how to audit and things of that nature. So we've seen this happen before, right? This isn't anything new. And as a cloud service provider, and now doing this as an advisory service and an implementation with engineering services wrapped around it, at the end of the day, it's the same stuff. It's old hat, right? It's just a different colored hat, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Yeah. So seeing it before specifically, you've seen changes in these types of programs that then impact organizations. They have to follow the change. Let's talk a bit about what changed here, so we have a sense of the scope of the impact. Because I think, and maybe if you have some insight why things have changed, because I think there's significant adoption, right?
Yeah.
Certainly some consistency in how we look at this and how we bring our programs forth and deliver against it. So what was something failing? Did the environment change in a way? I don't know. Was it AI a driver? What were some of the reasons that these changes came to bear?
I mean, I can start if we think about it from, I guess, if we frame what's the quote unquote business issue, right? That all of these changes are driven to hopefully solve for. Not enough vendors, solutions, suppliers in the federal marketplace that agencies, that primes could leverage, right? Very, very limited in terms of what those technologies are. Candidly, a lot of them, a little, as Jason says, old and crusty and archaic. So with all of the tremendous research and development that's happened, AI certainly being a factor of that, there's a number of new solutions that candidly those operating within the federal space could benefit from leveraging. The challenge is the way the quote unquote old process worked. It took a long time. It was very rudimentary and expensive in order for those new products to get to market. So agencies and primes and really anyone within the federal space could start leveraging those and using those. So at the 10,000-foot view, I think actions needed to be taken, and it's a good thing that those actions have been taken in order to expand the number of tools and solutions that are available, and that drives further efficiency, et cetera. Now, the question becomes the actions that have been proposed and have been taken. It may address one challenge from a business perspective, but has it created other challenges relative to trust and transparency from a cybersecurity standpoint? And I think the most important thing is, and maybe it's almost like an indirect impact of the actions that have been taken, has the responsibility shifted? And has the responsibility shifted relative to due diligence or understanding these tools and solutions? Has it shifted to the right stakeholder? Does that stakeholder realize that the responsibility has shifted? And I think we would argue right now, a lot of them do not, right? So with the speed in which the changes in the program has been moving, the stakeholders and their understanding of those changes and what it means from a business impact perspective is lagging behind. So we kind of have this gap of some believe that the program changes have been put in place to address an issue, not disagreeing with that, but the lagging of the understanding of what that means and how it addresses the issue is what we're trying to deal with from a business perspective.
And
Jason, I
what
don't
are
know
you
if you,
hearing? Yeah, Jason,
yeah,
as you're talking to folks.
Yeah, it's this industry in general, right, is moved at glacial speed for the dawn of time, right? Nothing moves fast, right? And a lot of agencies are still in the waterfall mindset, right? Not very agile, not very much. And the FedRAMP RMF process in general is, and I'll say in the Rev 3 and the Rev 4 versions, certainly so. We're still in that mindset. Still, we're very much, we don't want things to be transient, right? And state, right? Inventory just in general, right? How do you inventory a system where a container only exists for 30 seconds before it gets killed, right? And what did that container do? And transparency and visibility into that thing, right? So DevOps just in general, right? DevOps didn't exist 12 years ago, right? We did have GitLab and we had things like GitHub in the early stages. We did have Git, right, from a repository perspective for code, but we didn't really have pipelines per se. We use things like, we find tools to do that for us, whether that was, something that we're deploying with, with Puppet or Chef or something like that to deploy the codes. It was very, it was almost like someone just typing the commands, but you're just running a shell script, right, to do those commands for you automated wise. Fast forward all that to now, right? All that stuff exists today. We've, vibe code everything for the most part, right? A lot of people are just throwing scripts together they don't really understand, but it accomplishes the outcome that they're looking for. And that isn't what government compliance has been designed for, right? Just in general, regulatory compliance in general, right? So I think that's in the past when I reference those past times, the speed in which that those things happened, the change that they happened, were dictated about where we were as an industry and where we were as dealing with change. We're not in that. We don't live in that anymore, right? We're living in people vibe coding something in 3 days and having a concept to working application or MVP in a very short period of time, or you're using some kind of tool like Mythos to go out and see what's going on inside of environments, right, for vulnerabilities, and try to do pen testing with language models. None of that stuff existed, right? So these things are trying to, these changes in FedRAMP have to move faster to deal with where we are today, right? Or where we are maybe 6, 12 months ago, right? Not dealing with where we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? So the speed in which our industry is seeing change is obviously just in general, right? Industry as in white collar, industry, not as in cybersecurity, regulatory compliance, that kind of thing. I mean, those are subsets of that, but just as a holistic thing, it has to respond to that, right? And how do we use things like DevSecOps? How do we use DevOps? How do we, build stuff in with engineering platforms to have something that's continuously done by a machine instead of by human, right? The RMF was all about human. Human runs a scan, human processes scan, results, throws them in a CVS file, may or may not get imported into Jira or some tool, that is FedRAMP authorized or whatever it is, not authorized now, but certified going forward, which is another thing. Us old and crusty people who've been around for a long time, we yelled at people nonstop for the last decade saying authorized, 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 not
Yeah.
certified.
No such
Now
thing
it's
as certification.
now it's certified. So it's like, for us old hatters, that's hard, right? And we don't want to accept government systems in general hate change, right? They always have hated change, right? And they will continue to hate change, right? So you have haters and you have followers and you have people that are now in this new camp that are coming into it fresh and new. They're maybe only in this space for less than 5 years. They don't know what FISMA really is, right? What did it look like? They don't have the history of that. It's sort of like using an abacus versus a calculator, right? If you don't understand how to use, slide rule as an engineer, you won't appreciate what that calculator does for you, right? And I'm not saying everyone has to have that history at all, right? Developers been taking advantage of, the fact that SSH just exists or a API just exists for them to use. They don't really have to understand that all the networking and all the other technology that goes into just allowing them to have that, right? Just to have that ability and all those things below that. FedRAMP is no different, right? It is having that history there is important, but it's also not required, right? So I think that's a big thing to just note.
So I want to take that, and so the timeline first off. So I think, was it June 30? The rules were finalized as of last week. We're into early adoption, and I think as of tomorrow, based on this recording, conversion opens. So there's a timeline there, and then there are different classes. So there's the ready conversion, and classes A through D that lead us down a path to funness and goodness, right? So there's that, which I want some insight from both of you. What does that look like? What does it mean? But I also think, kind of to your point, Jason, that some programs have existed for a decade or more, right? So they have a lot of knowledge and legacy to deal with. And then there's new stuff coming online that doesn't have to necessarily worry about the old things. And perhaps they can move forward in a way that is more efficient for their own business. So I guess what I'm asking is two parts. What's the timeline like, and the general impact to organizations for the timeline? And maybe a slight variance view of legacy, where you have to keep old things up and running, right? And you have a lot of knowledge in your program, a lot of policies and controls and everything built a certain way. How does that change? And if you're starting fresh, what does that look like? So I know a lot to unpack there, but I think that's going to cover most of the folks listening to this in terms of how to take that next step, right?
Yeah, and I think that is important to talk about, like where we're going to go in 26, right? Because the back half of this year is where all that change happens, right? Really, at the end of the day, that's going to be the biggest push. So, as of this recording, we've seen, FedRAMP Ready got created years ago as a step in order to get people interested in FedRAMP, get new systems in as an effort to get that in, right? We found that while the technical FedRAMP Ready has existed, it had technical controls, and a 3PAO could write you a RAR, a ready assessment report that could be used to show that you're ready to go, but you didn't really have to have a system security plan, all the policies and the RMF stuff, right? So if we look at what that is and what it was trying to accomplish, did it actually accomplish anything, right? I don't know the statistics of how many systems went from ready to authorized in that time frame, now going to be certified going forward, but I don't know that conversion rate was high, right? And while some systems that were ready that was significant enough or sufficient enough for commercial entities to use your system, it doesn't mean that obviously a government agency couldn't use you directly. You had to be authorized in that state, right? Now going to be certified. So how that all gets rolled out at the end of this month, the end of July, right? So the FedRAMP Ready program goes to legacy, right? And those no more ready systems are going in. The goal is to have everybody push to 20x, right? So if we look at FedRAMP as it exists, it's going to be the 20x program, and it's going to be Rev 5, the Rev 5 program, right? So those are going to be the two. If you read the Consolidated Rules, pretty easy to find, fedramp.gov. Click at the top, Consolidated Rules 2026. You'll see them. It'll link you out. You can go find important dates. You can find all the details inside there. But more important, they update, right? So this video is obviously being recorded in point in time, right? This is all being hosted inside of GitHub. So with anything with a GitHub, it's obviously a commit. Someone could change that at any time. So that's where you want to go look for any kind of up-to-date information, right? So the pipelines for Class A, Class B, Class C kind of roll out over a period of 30 to 60 days. And then as of January 1st, really it's mandatory adoption for all stakeholders. So really the end of this year, right, is what you have to kind of target for. And, really any new Rev 5 certifications that are going out, the current timeline is June 11th of 2027. There won't be any more Rev 5 certifications. It'll all be 20X. So what does that mean to businesses, right? So this is a big shift from an RMF mindset to a continuous DevSecOps, DevOps motion to prove compliance in real time over time, right? So instead of it being a human doing all these things, now a machine has to do it, right? And if you don't have a mature process or a mature engineering team that can actually do that work, these legacy systems that have been around for 10 years are going to have a really hard time adopting those things because vulnerability remediation has been the bane of everyone's existence, right? CISA came out with new guidelines as of a couple weeks ago stating, now, severity score isn't the thing you should be doing from a federal system perspective. Now there's a step process that you then prioritize the vulnerability based upon different factors in which that flow chart tells you to do. Instead of the 14, 30, 60, 90, 120 day thing, we're moving 3 to 21 days, right? And that's making people's heads explode, especially on systems that, traditionally we've been given 90 to 120 days to fix something. But again, going back to where the industry is, not surprising that's going to be a change. So, when you have language models now doing pen testing and doing that in real time, that's where this 20x program and where FedRAMP is trying to go is, and is going to go, not trying to go, but is going to go, is, having those things in place so that a human who is slow and error prone, not doing something, but have something that's repeatable and 24/7. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah. So completely agree. And thinking about this through a little bit of a different lens, because Sean, you brought this up in terms of where is an organization on their journey and what does that mean to them? Jason just stepped through, right? What's the timeline? What are all the changes? What's going to happen? It is, I think, clearly outlined, or maybe as clear as mud, depending upon who you are, what your background is, and as you read it,
Documented anyway.
it's documented, right? But if I look at this as not being an overly technical guy, but more of a business guy, if I look at it through that lens, okay, what does that mean to me? If I currently have a program, there's going to be a level of education. You need to understand, you need to map what you currently have into the new classifications and certifications. Now, that may sound kind of simple. It's not that clear cut, right? So understanding what the scope of maybe your old Rev 5 ATO was and understanding how does that translate into a new level of certification. Think about it internally. You got to re-educate everyone. You got to re-educate marketing. You got to re-educate sales. You got to understand what the go-to-market motion is. And remember, these organizations that maybe have traditionally interacted directly with agencies or primes, if they're not up to speed on what these changes are, and if they've buried their heads in the sand, the onus is now on you, right, as the supplier and the vendor to do that level of education. So in our experience so far, nobody's done that, right? They understand what the timeline is and they've heard there's going to be changes, but nobody's really dug in. It's kind of like the procrastination of, something's going to change and you've heard about it and you've read about it, but you don't want to deal with it. So you kind of put it in the corner or look the other way. But what we're advising organizations to do and what we're helping organizations to do from a business perspective is don't wait to do that. Be ready, be out in front, have a translation layer to say, this is what we've traditionally provided. This is what it's going to be now. Make sure you have a clear communication path to say, not our fault, right? Changes to the program. We're not trying to do anything in terms of downgrading our assurance, et cetera. But that level of education for organizations that have had a traditional program needs to occur. The second piece is for those folks that have been on the sidelines or fence sitters for a number of months to say, well, do we really want to make this investment from an ROI perspective? Seems like there's going to be a lot of changes. We should wait until these shake out. Again, they're here, but now you need to make a business decision in terms of where do you enter the ecosystem, right? So in the past, right, as Jason mentioned, there was really only two things. You either had an ATO or you had FedRAMP Ready. It was easier, I think, from a business perspective to determine, are we going to make an investment to be ready and get listed so we can get some eyes on us, and hopefully we get a prom date, which would then trigger the decision to go for ATO. Now this is a lot different. Where do you enter? Do you start with 20X? Is that relevant for you? Do you start with a different certification level? What does that mean, and how does that align to the business opportunities and the expectations from a potential customer and client perspective? Go to market motion, business decision. So there's more options that are available relative to entering this ecosystem now. However, with anything, right, it's like a kid that you give too many choices to, it becomes more confusing and harder to make a decision. So through some of the things that we're doing around ROI workshops, right, office hours, everything that we're doing complimentary because we're geeks when it comes to this stuff, we want to help organizations get educated and make sure that they enter the ecosystem at the right spot.
And I would dovetail off of that and say it doesn't matter if we're talking about consolidated rules for 2026, or if we're talking about the next thing that FedRAMP moves to, or CMC, or GovRAMP, or SOC 2, or ISO, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter from a regulatory perspective or a maturity level of your security operations practice or your security engineering, right? It's the same motion that we do, that you should be doing, right? As a business owner, maybe you don't have time to do it. Maybe you don't think to do it. Maybe it isn't something that's important until it becomes important because some external factor causes you to do it. But it's something you should be thinking about, especially if you're a C-level, a VP, someone who's in charge of something that is tied to revenue, tied to ROI on these objectives, and the business will feel pain if they don't have them, right? So that you should be doing that as a planning exercise regardless.
Well, it's so easy to see this is coming down the track, and this project off to my team. What's the impact going to be? And what's the team going to look at? They're going to look at, how does this change my current infrastructure? How does it change my dev process? How does it change my auditing? Does this impact my team? And then, oh, by the way, there's the business, right? How does this change how we do business? Right, to your point, how do I actually deliver what we're providing? How do we actually market it? How do we actually build it? The whole up and down the stack. And so I'm wondering if you can share with me some, I don't know, I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations on this already, where, yeah, starting off, looking at it from the business, or any aha moments when you start at that moment that say you can take this path and find a way to your objective much more cleanly and certainly with more certainty, because you looked at the business first. Any stories to share on that front?
Yeah, I think we have several. It's so I think we always bring it back to communication, right? And understanding what the expectations are from a stakeholder perspective. That's internal and that's external, right? So to your point, you're making a lot of references, I think, to maybe an engineering. At the end of the day, we're talking about engineering. And when I say engineering, yes, there's engineering in building a system, but there's also engineering of processes. There's engineering of the business. There's engineering of go to market. There's engineering of understanding what your stakeholders expect. So at the end of the day, communication and clarity is really where we focus. And we have a number of different examples where, candidly, I think one of the best value-added things that we do every day is to tell people not to pursue this because it doesn't align with their business needs, right? So one of the very first things that we do is say, look, this might be a bright, shiny object, if you will. You may think it may unlock additional ROI. You may think you understand what those expectations and requirements are. You may think you understand what the cost is associated with this. But if we bring that back to, is this going to benefit the business today or even 6 months from now? 50% of the time, we lead organizations in the direction of no, don't go down that path. I wouldn't if I were you. And in our own businesses throughout the years, we've had to make those very decisions as well. That doesn't mean that it isn't going to change, but communication and understanding what that impact is oftentimes will lead a horse to a different bucket of water, which is this doesn't make sense for you to pursue at this point in time, right? In the other vein, we have a number of organizations that have come to us that are going down the wrong path, right? Lots of organizations have come to us to say, hey, we've heard about this new 20X thing. This sounds great. We hear that it's quicker and cheaper and faster and, less dependent upon purpose-built systems and heavy engineering, and we could just use a platform off the shelf. Although all of that may be true, if the requirement that you have from a potential prospect, whether that's an agency or whether that's even a sub or a prime contractor, if that requirement doesn't explicitly say they're going to accept 20X as an example, and they expect more than that, don't think that you're going to get away with a lower bar from a business perspective. So we just had one of these conversations yesterday where an organization was ready to pour all these resources and all this money into 20X because they thought it was a stepping stone relative to where they needed to be with their client. We said, why are you going to do that? You have to go for a certification level, right? Which is effectively the old ATO process. That is what you're going to have to go for. Don't waste your money trying to go through something that isn't going to align to your prospect's expectations. So a lot of our conversations is, should you be doing any of these at all? Does it make sense? Are you doing the right one in order to meet the expectations of your prospects and customers? And we have those conversations daily.
Yeah, and there's an additional thing. I agree with everything you just said, right? And that's the other thing to think about here. It's not only just dollars, right? It is also organizational disruption, because regardless of who you're talking about, you hear there's a lot of people talk. A lot of organizations will talk about 20X. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's faster, whatever. That is true. Remember that the Rev 5 process took 18 months at one point, right? So is it faster? Yes. Is it immediate and instant? No, it is not, right? So again, think about organizational change. Think about how fast things have to take place, and is your organization built to take that change on, right? So if you're a large organization, anything over 500 employees, 1,000 employees, maybe there's a couple hundred users in your organization that's in your system. That is not a small endeavor to retrain 100 people or a couple hundred people to deal with that, right? So it doesn't matter if the controls themselves and the audit process is quicker, right? I think, Sean, you said this earlier, is that it really comes down to total piece of this and that disruption, right? So how that impacts you is not, you can't just focus on dollar and cents here, right? And that's a lot of times why we lead with, or we talk to someone about this, they back away from it or go into it with better vision, is that, that's something that's always overlooked, right? It's if it's just a budgetary number, a number on a spreadsheet, then that's one conversation. But if you're looking at it from a holistic perspective, it's going to take 50% of my organization, 50% of their time over the next year to get the applications, the infrastructure, and everything else in a place where it can actually do KSIs for 20X. That's a whole nother problem, right? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't think about that or shouldn't do that, but you have to think about it, right? And you have to have to plan for it. And those are the little nuggets that people get tripped up on, right? And once they get into the process, it's too late, right? You're in the mess at that point. You've already made an effort, emotion. Now it's harder to get out.
Yeah, and so many decisions. I'm sure you've seen them all as well. Different environments bring different challenges. Different ways something has been built from a stack perspective brings different challenges. Whether you're using partners and third parties to help deliver some of these things, or you're riding on a cloud service provider and trying to inherit things, and how you put all that together in terms of an architecture matters. How you staff and build your team. Do you do it all in-house? To your point, if it's going to take 50%, that's probably 50% less you're doing on your current business, right? and you do that in parallel? Are you disrupting the current, not just moving forward, but disrupting current business as well because of the changes you're making? A lot of that stuff you have to take into account. And again, I think you guys have seen it and have had the conversations and have helped companies move from A to Z in a purposeful manner. And I think that's the key. Too many stories, man, I don't necessarily need to share any here, but I'm sure you've seen a gazillion stories where things go off the rails because of one decision up front that just throws everything off, and it's hard to get it back on. And you can certainly bring people in, and I know you have teams that you can actually bring on site to help organizations. What kind of people do you need? Do they need to be U.S. employees, for that matter, right? And where can you find those folks? And I think you guys have a lot of the answers just because you've seen it and been there. And Mike, to your point, it may not always be the answer is move forward right now. It might be wait 6 months or get your other part of the business working to help fund or whatever it is. So I'll leave it there because I think we're kind of running out on time here. I want to maybe give you a second to maybe chew on what I just said and maybe provide some feedback to folks listening to where to start. What's that first step in connecting with you to get a better assessment of where they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to communication, right? That the first step is, at least for us, again, we're here to help to have that business conversation. That's where we're going to start. We can certainly, dive deep into the technical and engineering elements, but that would be, I think, doing anybody a disjustice, right? And so you should really start with the business conversation. I think to your point, it's not just getting to a decision today if it's a yes or a no. It could be a maybe if, right? And that's kind of where we leave every conversation is understanding. It's just like any decision that you make. What are those trigger points that you need to have defined? Today, you may not have that. These are the things to watch out for. If these things happen from a business perspective, it may be something that you move forward with, right? As an example. But as I mentioned, we offer complimentary ROI workshops, business discussions to anyone and everyone. And it's not just an old term I used to use, the assessed entities, right? So not just the organizations that are looking to go through this, it's the relying parties as well. So even primes, I mean, we do a lot of work with primes to help them understand how do they manage their supply chain? What should they be asking for? What should they be looking for? What are red flags? We have conversations with other consulting and advisory partners and assessor firms. So we're here just to really add and benefit the community in terms of addressing those questions and helping organizations wherever they fit in that equation make better business decisions.
Yeah, and I would say with all of that, right, anytime you go into something like this, come with truth and inquisitiveness and openness. Don't come with a closed mind, right? Because if you come in with a closed mind, this is change, right? And the old book, "Who Moved My Cheese" type thing, right? Is echoes in the back of my mind, right? Is that if you're already coming with a closed mind, you've already said no, right? You've already not embrace the fact that this is a change that's going to happen regardless if you want it to or not. A change is going to happen. Doesn't mean it's this one. Doesn't mean it's the next one. This one may not impact you as much. You may already be set up for all of this, right? But the difference here is that, coming to these things and just having conversations, that's the first step, right? And almost looking for that assistance and trying to figure that stuff out, and going this stuff alone, relying on language models to provide you information may or may not get you where you want to be. Most likely it will not, because while things are, language models are only as good as the guardrails that are put up around it, right, and the training in which it is given. Certainly say language models in the current state of this recording are not where they should be to give that kind of advisory to you to how to run your business for the next how many years you're going to have this. This isn't a 1 or 2 year thing. This is a long haul thing if you choose to go down this path, right? And it's not like even 20X is not just a short, 1 day, 2 day thing, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to create a new workflow and all once we're here, right? I'm ready for assessment. And that's not the case, right? So having those almost those as guardrails for yourself is key.
I think you're on mute, Shaw.
Look at that.
There you go.
All right. I was going to say something. Oh, nice editing. There we go. All right. I always have fun editing. So, Mike, I'll give you the final word, but I think my takeaway here is, to your point, Jason, it's not coming with a closed mind. It's coming with an open mind, with a view for what you want to achieve from a business perspective. And in doing so, picking the right partner that you can trust to help guide you down that path. Whether you started marching and you're held up, or you headed down the wrong path, or you haven't started marching at all and you need some guidance on where to take those first steps. I've heard lots of stories where you've helped organizations in both of those scenarios. So, Michael, final word from you. Connecting with folks. I know you're at a lot of events and a lot of locations, so perhaps people can talk to you in person as well. Final word.
Yeah, don't wait and don't go it alone, and reach out for guidance and for experience that we've had collectively, not just Jason and I, but we've got an entire firm behind this, all U.S. citizens, by the way. That can speak to this, that have come from every different walk within this industry, former auditors to engineers to business owners to psychologists. So
good stuff. Well, Jason, Michael, important topic, obviously, one that's very pressing and one that requires attention and the support from trusted folks like yourselves and the rest of the Steel Patriot Partner team. So thank you both for this conversation. SteelPatriotPartners.com, and connect with Jason and Michael online as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.